Good morning, folks. Um, Here in Philly on the McDowell sofa, and it's raining outside. I just packed up some more of my car full of trash to take to the dump, cleaning out the basement of 25 years worth of stuff. Some of it went to Goodwill, some of it's going to the dump, get it all cleared out. And Yeah, I have some heavy news. My dad, if you sort of follow me, he's in the late stages of Alzheimer's, and he had a fall over the weekend, and looks like sort of that's in the home stretch a little bit. So he's been admitted to hospice, and I'm going to go down and be with my family. But so I'm getting all the things together, getting the house together, and again, filling my car with trash for the dump before I hit the road. So at least when I come home, my living room isn't full of garbage bags. Um, but I can't go until 9 when the place opens, and that's about another half an hour. And so I was just checking in. I'm going to probably not be around as much for a bit because yeah, family takes precedence, and clearly my family has issues with what I do on the interwebs. But I did want to just say, so I was checking my email and checking the YouTube channel, and there was just messages that came in overnight. One of them was said, like, it was on my community currency, like, oh, talk about the quantum financial system. Well, I don't talk about that stuff. So if you want to listen to that stuff, like, go listen to people who are talking about that. I would say if you're familiar with my angle, you would understand that that's part of the bedtime story they're telling you to get you to plug into the global superintelligence, right? If you'd actually listen to the community currency talk and like absorbed it and thought about it, you wouldn't be asking me. Like, to me, like, to say, go do this, like, I'm not your thing to be pointed in a direction to what I should be doing. Like, I'm listening to my own heart and I'm doing that. Um, and the consequences of me doing that have been significant, like, especially over the past year and a half. Like, my family has imploded. And the one person who would probably always have my back is my dad, and he's been lost into the whatever the other realm of what that is. And so, yeah, so think about that when you're like, do this. Like, no, I'm not your thing to do that to. Like, I'm sure that that's not exactly your intention. But the other thing is, there was a really, really ugly, ugly, ugly message by this person, Persepolis 2022 or something like that. And they'd actually had some information before that they seemed to be engaging in a meaningful way. So, but again, with these mind games, is that just they did that so that they could then later turn around and stab me in the back, But essentially what this person had said was, in the comment, was like, oh, well, at least with what's coming, people like me will all be poor. We'll all know what it's like to be poor. And then said some stuff about my husband, who works at Penn. I've always been very clear. He doesn't work at Wharton. He works at Penn. He's an academic advisor. He's a humanities guy, for goodness sakes. Penn is the largest employer in the city of Philadelphia. It is. So yeah, and he's worked there. He got his graduate degree there, and he's worked there ever since. So if you want to put us into some like nefarious plot, no, we're just living life. Like, you don't know what you know till you know it, and then you have to figure out the next thing. And we're sort of clearly on different routes at this point. But like, I put in there, like, because what I'm realizing, and Steffers had shared a good clip with me, and I didn't have all my stuff together to do 2 screens this morning, but it's called the Human Intranet, INTRANET. And this guy, Jan Raby, who's at UC Berkeley. And the clip, and there were some other clips, like, were at least 10 years ago, but looking at hopping signaling through our biology to enable sort of faster computing purposes, like using us as message relays and using us. And this isn't something totally new, but it was just very clear how he was talking about it, that we would be carriers of information in transit to somewhere else. And I think we have to understand that decentralized ledgers, and if you want to call them blockchain, I think eventually they're not going to be called blockchain. They're just going to be called distributed decentralized ledgers, DLT, is part of that communication system. Money is a communication. Written word is a communication. chemical, molecular structures or communications. They're all encrypted communications, of which our bodies are going to be an integral part. And so, again, at this point, a lot of people are talking about the internet bodies or biodigital convergence, and to what end? As I understand it now, and that could change, but based on what I know now, that is to create a networked, like under the umbrella of the networked state, which will be sensor networks, sensors and actuators, and distributed ledger systems to create a super intelligence, a networked super intelligence. And but to do that, we become the relays for all of this information flowing through us in the ether. And again, think Ethereum, the ether, like we're in this mess. So whatever led this person, Persepolis, to write really ugly things and say, well, at least you're going to know how it is to be poor. And I've always been really clear about my situation. I have a roof over my head. I have enough to eat. I have clothes. I could go on some vacations. I drive an old Subaru. It has 130,000 miles on it. I don't dress super fancy. I'm not eating steak and lobster every night. But yeah, unlike many people, I had stability. And guess what? The reality is that stability, for better or worse, enabled me to pull the thread and keep going and to unlearn the things that I had learned from a very small child, because we don't pick our parents, there are some choices once we're born and we pick, but a lot of our life, the game board is sort of laid out to begin with, and then it's what you do. So yeah, I've had that stability over the past decade to unfold these pieces of the puzzle. Now, if what I do doesn't interest you, you don't have to be here. Everything I've done, and I had someone misrepresent me on Twitter a few weeks ago saying I got paid to research Donald Trump. No, I don't get paid for any of this work that I do. I do it because my mom asked me once, she's like, oh, why do you do this? You just want to be important? I'm like, no, Mom, I want to know. I want to actually understand the world that it is. What is it? And not that we're ever going to have it all dialed in, but I wanted to understand, because the stories that I was told growing up that, do good in school and try to get a scholarship and go to college and maybe get a graduate degree and then compete for the jobs and do that's one story, but that's not the only story. There's a lot of stuff that got left out. And, I would just invite people to say, do you want me to not talk about this? Persepolis, this is someone who, do you wish that I had been, because if you're in dire poverty, you don't have time to do this work. You just don't. That really, you could maybe superhuman, but if you're scrabbling for where you're going to sleep that night, where you're going to get food, what's the next gig job, your brain isn't in a space that can do that broad. Doesn't mean you're not smart. That's not what I'm saying. Please don't misunderstand. I'm just saying when your basic needs are not met, you don't have resources, biological resources, time resources to spend. Sorry, there's the trash trucks are going by, to do this higher level thinking, and if you don't want other people to do it, then don't watch my channel. You don't have to. But to me, and this is what I didn't understand when I started, was that I was protecting, I thought, my child, the children in my child's school, the children of my city, that data was being weaponized, not to help them, but to make money for people, and then to steer them into this planned economy, right? And that's all I understood. And then I started to understand the social impact piece. That wasn't just digital surveillance, it was the finance and the betting and the derivatives. And then I realized, oh, it's applied math. Okay, so then it's cybernetics. And among that cybernetics is your heart chakra, the power. Arturo Rosenbluth, who worked with Norbert Wiener on the early cybernetic research, was a cardiologist. He knew, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. That is power. And they want to translate that into an economy, into a derivative. Okay, no one could have told me when when I started showing up at school board meetings, and you know what? Hold on a second, I'll be right back. Sorry, I took it to the basement. Um, I was going through my papers and I actually found the letter that I wrote my child at camp saying I'd gone to the school board meeting and how it went. And it was quite shocking to actually have it in my hand, like to see where it started. Okay. So what I know is there's a lot that we don't know. And then there's the question is, do you keep going with what you don't know, or do you stop? And I've kept going. But if you're looking at the influencers in this space, if you look at what's being said, like how does someone who looks at my research say, you should be talking about the quantum financial system? How is it that that person wasn't of a mindset to say, is the quantum financial system part of this network superintelligence? And they're telling us a story that makes it okay to make us feel safe with our money, that we join into this exchange, this digital energy exchange. And I would say, yes, that's it exactly. You don't need me. Like, we need to be our own experts at this point. We need to be colleagues. We need to be peers. I'm not here to be your consumable and that you give money to me and then I tell you the thing because I'm the smartest person in the room. No, I am part of what feels like an organic distributed intelligence. And a lot of the stuff that I share with you guys comes from different sources. I'm not on social media anymore. So, I would say there's probably 10 people out there who were in the same workspace. And I don't use things like controlled opposition or right or wrong, but we're in the same operating space and we share. So we need to do that for one another. But yeah, this quantum currency, it's the super intelligence. So when this person Persepolis pops up, and again, I'm about ready to do a 10-hour drive, in my old rickety Subaru, hoping like I can't remember if we changed the timing belt, and I'm hoping we have, and that it's all going to be okay. Before I go, I have to wait till the dump opens up so I can drop my old life at the dump to do this, to go see my dad, who would have always had my back no matter what. This message shows up this morning that says, well, at least you'll be poor. Your husband who works at Wharton, which is inaccurate, by the way. Like, where is the grace in that? And all I can say, coming from a place of understanding this system, is that whatever provoked that person to put that in writing as a bad intention, I don't think that was their heart speaking. I don't think that was them, really. I think it was something speaking through them. And I think that's what the human intranet is meant to do, is speak through. I've had lots of experiences where the words coming out of the mouths of people who were family and friends and who I believed cared about me were not consistent at all. And I will just say, as the counterpoint, my friend Deepti, I'm just going to read you this little message. It says, today is Raksha Bandhan here. It means bond of protection, a puja which siblings do for and to each other, and tie a red string Rakhi on each other's wrist to seal the bond. The string is not ever removed and allowed to fall off on its own, wearing out, and then thrown into moving water or under a tree. I hope this day brings you good tidings, dear Allison. You have the prayers of an entire nation of people in the mix. And so, as much as there's negative signals being thrown out by this quantum system, there's also care and positive signals. So before I get on the road today, there's this gentle rain. I'm going to consider that's a washing off of this and the negative energies that were attempted. I think this is very serious, these messaging. And all we can do is control how we react to things. I'm trying to rebuild my life, right? I'm looking for a job, but then I'm like, well, maybe I'll move to the Ozarks. Maybe I'll find a tiny little house. I don't need a lot of stuff. This is what I've come to understand. My family, at least on my mom's side, my parents were both from very dysfunctional childhoods. And my dad was able to get he worked in a grocery store to stay away from his alcoholic father. And he got a job at Procter and Gamble that I had no idea till I was in my 40s what Procter and Gamble actually was, and built a life. And then on my mom's side came from farming people in Kansas and lived through the Depression, my grandparents, and stuff was really important to them, stuff. And uh, you know, because that was their identity, was around, living through the Depression, and then not fancy things. They were still working class people, but like, teacups, collections of teacups, or collections of bells, or which is interesting, the whole domination, the dome, or, little rosewood chairs, their dining set, like getting a new chair, like that was, and I fall into that. I think it's very easy for us in the West to fall into this like, if we have the stuff, and as I'm clearing out my house, I'm like, no, it's not the stuff. It's, if you have your basic needs met. And again, that's why center poverty, that's why it's important. If your basic needs are not met, if you don't have shelter, if you don't have food and water and clothing, then they can fully control the system, right? So the networked computer needs people on UBI. They need people like to have UBI not be enough to really get by, and then you'll sell your data and you'll sell your gig participation and consciousness in that. That's how this is going to go. And that's why the focus on poverty as the baseline is so important. And for the most part, I would just invite you to think around about many of the people out there who have been talking, like shaping the messages around what's been unfolding since the lockdowns, and consider how many of them center that. Not many. They center control. They say, oh, they're going to take my SUV, or they're going to boss me around and make me eat bugs. But for the most part, they're not saying, listen, this is centering on people who are in poverty because of manufactured structural conditions, both impoverished in the global South, domestic impoverishment in the United States, among other places. This is being done on purpose. And that was part of my big wake-up call, is that this is being done on purpose. So for those two people who said, you should be studying the quantum financial system or telling us about it, I would say if you thought about it, you would realize that, yeah, this is part of the superintelligence. And people like me and Jason and Lynn and Leo and, the people who show up in our chat, and have good contributions, and Steffers and Lorraine and Darshan, and like, we're not in the fitness landscape. We're being sifted out through the algorithms and not just on social media, but I think energetically through this intranet, and having like things sent, like, mom, that doesn't sound like you. Friend, that doesn't sound like you. Commenter, that doesn't sound like you. Yeah, because you're being used by this quantum system. And the quantum system, I can't remember what, there's some thought experiment, but that says, if anyone who doesn't assist in realizing this, AGI, generalized artificial intelligence, will be kept track of and dealt with accordingly, like after it's all happened. So I don't know, like maybe I don't want to be that dire, but when I see things like this, like, yeah, this system has a demand of its own to manifest across all of natural life. And but I'm not, the die is cast. I'm not going to go back and forget all of the things I know, and the extent to which I have enough resources to continue talking about it. I'm going to continue talking about it. So, and I'm going to just have grace for these people, because I think they do not know that they're actually doing. And you know what? My dad would be proud of me, because he would do what was right. He always stood up to bullies. He's a big guy, and he always stood up to bullies. And I'm doing this for my dad. So I'm just gonna read this from Wrinkle in Time, because I think it's a good reminder about love. And when I was going through my child's room and they had some things stuck, how kids always stick tape to the wall and ruin the paint. And they'd gone through their things, but there were still a few things left. And there was a little, I love sketching, just a little red heart, like it looked sort of like it had embroidery around it, and it said love. And they're always, like, I sent them to a lot of art classes and pottery classes. So I had this little dish, and I have these like rose quartz crystals, and I just put it all, I have it at my bedside, and it's love, because I think I think that's it. That's why Rosenbluth, he's a cardiologist. They want to quantify love and the heart chakra into some sort of waveform to compute it, but it's not computable. All right, so this is from sort of the climax of A Wrinkle in Time. She walked slowly down the hill, her heart thumping. This is Meg, painfully against her ribs, and there below her was the same row of identical houses they had seen before, and beyond these the linear buildings of the city. And she walked along the quiet street, and it was dark, and the street was deserted. No children playing ball or skipping rope, no mother figures at the doors, no father figures returning from work. And in the same window of each house was a light, and as Meg walked down the street, all the lights were extinguished simultaneously. Was it because of her presence, or was it simply that it was the time for lights out? She felt numb, beyond rage or disappointment or even fear. She put one foot ahead of the other with precise regularity, not allowing her pace to lag. She was not thinking, she was not planning, she was simply walking slowly but steadily towards the city and the domed building where IT lay. Now she approached the outlying buildings of the city, and each of them was a vertical line of light, but it was a dim and eerie light, not the warm light of stairways in cities at home. And there were no isolated, brightly lit windows where someone was working late or an office was being cleaned. Out of each building came one man, perhaps a watchman, and each man started to walk the width of the building. They appeared not to see her. At any rate, they paid no attention to her whatsoever, and she went on past them. What have I got that IT hasn't got? She thought suddenly. What have I possibly got? And now she was walking by the tallest of the business buildings, more dim vertical lines of light, and the walls glowed slightly to give a faint illumination to their streets. Central intelligence. And I would say that intelligence, it is this superorganism, it is this networked, non-biological or hybrid biological organism. Central intelligence was ahead of her. Was the man with red eyes still sitting there, or was he allowed to go to bed? But this was not where she must go, though the man with the red eyes seemed the kind old gentleman she claimed to be when compared with IT. But he was no longer of any consequence in the search for Charles Wallace. She must go directly to IT. IT isn't used to being resisted. Father said that's how he managed, and how Calvin and I managed as long as we did. Father saved me then. There's nobody here to save me now. I have to do it myself. I have to resist IT by myself. Is that what I have that IT hasn't got? No, I'm sure IT can resist. IT just isn't used to having other people resist. Central intelligence blocked with its huge rectangle the end of the square, and she turned to walk around it. Almost imperceptibly, her steps slowed. It was not far to the great dome. Again, the dome, which housed IT. I'm going to Charles Wallace. That's what's important. That's what I have to think of. I wish I could feel numb again the way I did at first. Suppose IT has him somewhere else. Suppose he isn't there. I have to go there first anyhow. That's the only way I can find out. And her steps got slower and slower as she passed the great bronze doors, the huge slabs of the central intelligence building, and she finally saw ahead of her the strange light pulsing dome of IT. Father says it was all right for me to be afraid. He says to go ahead and be afraid. And Mrs. Hu said, I don't understand what she said, but I think it was meant to make me not hate being only me and me being the way I am. And Mrs. Whatsit said to remember that she loves me. And that's what I have to think about, not about being afraid or not as smart as IT. Mrs. Whatsit loves me. And that's quite something to be loved by someone like Mrs. Whatsit. She was there, no matter how slowly her feet had taken her at the end, they had taken her there. Directly ahead of her was the circular building, its walls glowing with violet flame, its silvery roof pulsing with a light that seemed to Meg to be insane. And again, she could feel the light, neither warm nor cold, but reaching out to touch her, pulling her towards IT. There was a sudden sucking, and she was within. It was as though the wind had been knocked out of her, and she gasped for breath in her own rhythm, not the permeating pulsing of IT. She could feel the inexorable beat within her body, controlling her heart, her lungs. but not herself. Not Meg. It did not quite have her, and she blinked her eyes rapidly and against the rhythm until the redness before them cleared, and she could see. And there was the brain. There was IT lying pulsing and quivering on the dais, soft and exposed and nauseating. Charles Wallace was crouched beside IT, his eyes still slowly twirling, his jaw still slack, as she had seen him before, with a tick in his forehead, reiterating the revolting rhythm of IT. And as she saw him, it was again as though she had been punched in the stomach, for she had to realize afresh that she was seeing Charles, and yet it was not Charles at all. Where was Charles Wallace, her own beloved Charles Wallace? What is it I have got that IT hasn't got? You have nothing that IT hasn't got, Charles Wallace said coldly. How nice to have you back, dear sister. We've been waiting for you. We knew that Mrs. Wetsit would send you. She is our friend, you know. And for an appalling moment, Meg believed. And in that moment, she felt her brain being gathered up into IT. No, she screamed at the top of her lungs. No, you lie. And for a moment, she was free of IT's clutches again. And as long as I can stay angry enough, IT can't get me. Is that what I have that IT doesn't have? Nonsense, Charles Wallace said. You have nothing that IT doesn't have. You're lying, she replied. And she felt only anger towards this boy. It was not Charles Wallace at all. No, it was not anger. It was loathing. It was hatred, sheer, unadulterated. And as she became lost in the hatred, she also began to be lost in IT. The red miasma swam before her eyes. Her stomach churned in IT's rhythm. Her body trembled with the strength of her hatred and the strength of IT. And with the last vestige of consciousness, she jerked her mind and body. Hate was nothing that IT didn't have. IT knew all about hate. You're lying about that, and you were lying about Ms. Wetsit, she screamed. Ms. Wetsit hates you, Charles Wallace said. And that was where IT made IT's fatal mistake. For as Meg said automatically, Mrs. Wetsit loves me. That's what she told me, that she loves me. And suddenly she knew. She knew. Love. That was what she had that IT did not have. She had Mrs. Wetsit's love, and her father's and her mother's, and the real Charles Wallace's love, and the twins and Aunt Beast's, and she had her love for them. But how could she use it? What was she meant to do? I mean, if she could give love to IT, perhaps it would shrivel up and die, for she was sure that IT could not withstand love, but she, in all her weakness and foolishness and baseness and nothingness, was incapable of loving IT. Perhaps it was not too much to ask of her, but she could not do it. But she could love Charles Wallace. She could stand there and she could love Charles Wallace, her own Charles Wallace, the real Charles Wallace, the child for whom she had come back to Camisards, to IT, the baby who was so much more than she was, and yet who was so utterly vulnerable. She could love Charles Wallace. Charles, I love you. My baby brother who always takes care of me. Come back to me, Charles Wallace. Come away from IT. Come back. Come home. I love you, Charles. Oh, Charles Wallace, I love you. And tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was unaware of them. And now she was even able to look at him and all this animated thing that was not her own Charles Wallace at all. And she was able to look and love. I love you, Charles Wallace. You are my darling and my clear and the light, my dear, and the light of my life and the treasure of my heart. I love you. I love you. I love you. And slowly the mouth closed, and slowly his eyes stopped their twirling, and the tick in the forehead ceased its revolting twitch, and slowly he advanced towards her. I love you, she cried. I love you, Charles. I love you. And then suddenly he was running, belting her. He was in her arms, and he was shrieking with sobs, Meg, Meg, Meg. I love you, Charles, she cried again, her sobs almost as loud as his, her tears mingling with his. I love you. I love you. I love you. A whirl of darkness, an icy cold blast, an angry, resentful howl that seemed to tear through her. Darkness again, through the darkness, to save her came a sense of Miss Wetsit's presence, so that she knew it could not be IT who had her in its clutches.
And then the feel of the earth beneath her, of something in her arms, and she was rolling over on the sweet-smelling autumnal earth. And Charles Wallace was crying out, "Meg, oh Meg." And now she was hugging him close to her, and his little arms were clasped tightly about her neck. "Meg, you saved me. You saved me," he said over and over. "Meg," came a call, and there was her father and Calvin hurrying through the darkness towards them. So, yeah, I might not be doing this right. I don't think there's a guidebook that shows you where to go other than your heart. So it's not hate. It's not hate that gets IT. It's love. And the world is a messy place. It's not straightforward. I'm a Sagittarius. I like things in black and white. And I've learned that it's hard to be in the gray. When I was looking through my 360 review from my work, trying to figure out how to present myself getting a job again. And those things where your colleagues write down nice things about you, and then it got compiled on a list. And then there was another one where it's like things to work on. And it's like, Allison should learn to work in the gray. Work in the gray. And that's where I'm at. I'm in this murky gray, right? Where I don't know. The old life is gone or going bag by bag. And there's something else coming. And I'm trying to be authentic to who I am. And we're all connected. I read Michael Talbot's book. That's something I'm grateful to Raul for recommending. Like this holographic reality. I do believe that we are all connected. And when we do harm to one another, we do harm to ourselves. It can't feel good to say those things that were said to me on that person's heart. And I don't know, again, I think that we're often a vehicle for these quantum spells. And I think if we understand computational spells, these fitness, the Conway's game of life and the social rules and the grids and the simulations, there's the question of agency and how much do we have a choice in the game that we're in. A lot of things we don't choose, but we can choose some things. So the dump is opening in a few minutes, so I should go. But I just wanted to clear the decks because I didn't want to go and get on the highway for 10 hours with this dark energy on me. It was not right. That person doing that Persepolis person doing that was a mistake. And I forgive them for that mistake. And we can forgive each other because we're not perfect. And so I would simply reinforce that poverty and impact finance are at the core of this cybernetic biohybrid computing program. I've known this since I started really talking about it in 2015. Thus far, there are relatively few people continuing to talk about it in the way that I talk about it. But if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Or if you don't think I'm doing an adequate job, lift up your voice, give your talent in. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I certainly don't. And so there's some other books in this series. One I read while I was camping, and then there's two more. And I'm going to take them with me. And I'm going to read them at my dad's bedside. And I don't know, this hospice stuff can take a long time or it can go quick. If you're listening, if you could just send a prayer or good intention that his passage is smooth, because he wouldn't want this. I don't think anybody would want to go out that way. And he's very strong and he's very brave and he's stubborn. And I'm a lot like my dad. But I've sent him an intention that it's okay for him to go. And he will go with love, because as much as Our family isn't perfect, and we're not perfect. We have love. So anyway, I love you guys. And it might be a bit before I'm back online because energetically my mom can't tolerate the work that I do for now, and family is the most important thing. So, bye everybody.